The world of work. It fuels families, countries, and economies. In Barbados, work has evolved, switching focus from the sugar industry to financial services and tourism. And just as work has evolved, so have workers' rights. One of these major changes came with the proclamation of the Employment Rights Act in April 2013, a move which signaled the end of years of consultation and the beginning of a new era for Barbados.
The ERA, as you call it, the Employment Rights Act, which, as you said, was passed last year, 2012, but it was only proclaimed in April of this year. Before that, a lot of what is in the legislation was not covered by legislation at all. So this is not replacing any other act, like how we have the Safety and Health is replacing Factories Act and so on. This isn't really replacing any older legislation, because a lot of this was not covered in legislation before. A lot of this is essentially best practice, things that have been done in Barbados, as we say, customs and practice, part of our voluntaristic exercise as well. But that's how things were done, but they were not codified in law. But we have new players in the market. It's a new generation. Well, several generations would have passed, but it's a new generation now. And some of the rationale for doing things the way they were done in the 40s and 50s and 60s, you may not understand why today. We have new players coming in, especially persons coming from overseas. They look to our legislation. When persons are coming from overseas to establish a business here, and we in Barbados are encouraging foreign investment. We want companies to come and establish in Barbados. And the same way we want to make sure that we have other structures and infrastructure in place to encourage these companies to come. We make sure that our staff or people are well educated. We always say to foreign investors, come to Barbados. It's a good place to do business. Barbadians are well educated, they're teachable, they're trainable, they have a good work ethic. This is what we tell them. And then we say we have a good telecommunication system, we have political stability, all the reasons to come to Barbados. So when they come now, they're looking around to see how they will do things. And they look in the law for what legislation applies to industrial relations. They don't ask your aunt or your uncle how things work and how much sick leave you will get and so on. They look in the law to see what it is they are supposed to do. Never mind that we may be accustomed doing things a certain way for decades. They look in the law. And where it wasn't in the law, we can argue as much as we like. That's not how we do things in Barbados. Means absolutely nothing if it's not in the law.
This reality made the creation of the Employment Rights Act even more critical and, through dialogue with employer and employee representatives, government proclaimed the Act in April 2013. Minister Bayersaku says prior to the legislation, custom and practice reigned.
What happened prior to this? If you had a concern, we all know the Labour Department is the place to go to. But the Labour Department can only uphold the law. So if there was something that was happening that was against the law, the Labour Department could say to the employer, to the employee even, this is what is in the law, this is right, this is wrong, and so on. If it was not in the law, but you felt that this was against the way we did things, then you would bring the sides together, especially if you were unionized. The union, you would come with your union rep or so on, and the employer would come, and we would sit and we would consult, we would negotiate. Or if it wasn't a case where you were unionized, but you just felt that this wasn't right, it may have violated some principle, some human right, the most the Labour Department could do is call the employer, and say, listen, can you rethink this and try gentle moral suasion, you know? And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. So we had to say, well, look, the Labour Department needs to have some ammunition, that when a client, who is often the employee, comes to say, this is a problem, the Labour Department can then go to the employer and say, listen, this violates that section of the law. When you do that, you get a different response. Nobody wants to be in violation of the law, usually. So that is why we had to move on with the law, so that we can now have recourse for individuals who come to the Labour Department.
Fortunately, Ensuring the rights of employees has now been enshrined in law. Under the Employment Rights Act, employees have the right at the commencement of employment to a written statement of particulars of employment, the right, whenever salary or wages are paid, to a written statement of particulars of the payment, the right to be consulted before being laid off or placed on short time, the right, if dismissed for redundancy, to priority on a rehiring in certain circumstances. Where employment has ended, the right to a certificate giving particulars of the employment, and the right not to be unfairly dismissed.
One of the main concerns that I find that employees have certainly when they come to this office is how they were terminated. How they were terminated, how much notice they got or didn't get, the amount of money they got, their vacation pay, usually the holidays with pay. That's other legislation that we are actually fine-tuning. We had to revise that. There is a Holidays with Pay Act, but we did have some administrative challenges with that act. So we actually we've been looking at it for a while. We should be ready to have that new Holidays with Pay debated shortly. It was debated, it was laid in Parliament, but there was one matter that I wanted to have looked at again.
With dismissal being one of the major concerns for workers and employers alike, the Employment Rights Act offers further guidelines on the issue. This includes standard disciplinary procedures, such as progressive discipline, which requires oral or written warnings before stronger action is taken. Minimum notice periods for employers and workers before terminating employment. And it also sets out the purpose of the Employment Rights Tribunal, which may be used to mediate settlements not resolved at the level of the Chief Labour Officer. Minister Bayer Suku made it clear that the purpose of the legislation was not to make business difficult for employers.
We're not trying to bring undue pressure on employers as well. There are just certain basic rights that we were saying employees should have. And more as best practice, as people are exposed to best practice in all over the world, we found that our employers also were more willing. So we actually did consult. By the time I took this to Parliament in 2012, we did have the buy-in. We made a few more amendments, but we did have the buy-in from all parties. Everybody understood that there would be a period of adjustment, and there's no legislation that is going to please every single person. But we did have the buy-in because we made the necessary changes that everybody wanted. And also, in the interim, we had subsequent protocols. We're now at Protocol 6. And if you read Protocol 5 and Protocol 6, some of the things in that protocol about termination and other things are exactly what the law is calling for. So by the time we got the law to Parliament, we were able to say, well, the social partners, through the protocols, have already signed on to this because it's there in Protocol 6 and it's already signed on to. So we know that what we are doing is backed by our social partners.
She explained that the Employment Rights Act aimed to provide a baseline for decent work, especially for some of the more vulnerable workers in our society.
And as crazy as it seems, there are a lot of workers in Barbados who do not receive even a bit of paper when they are engaged. So they don't know who they're working for, what company they're working for. They may meet somebody who says, listen, I know this place is taking on workers, my workplace is taking on workers, come and go up there, you go up there, you talk to the boss man and so on, and you start working. And you have no piece of paper that says, I'm engaged from the 22nd of July at such and such a rate, I will be paid weekly, I'll be paid holidays, I'm entitled to 2 weeks holiday with pay, I'm expected to have X amount of lunchtime, none of these things. And you kind of go along with the flow, you do what other people are doing until the day you take holiday, and then you realize, but hold on, I'm not getting any holiday pay. And you assume that everybody in Barbados gets holiday pay, and then you realize, no, they don't do it that way, but you just didn't know because it was never there. Even worse than that, I see people who, they call me, they come to me in this very office, and they say, listen, I started working with this company 6 weeks ago, and I haven't seen any pay yet. Do you know how you're being paid? No, I don't know, but you started working, you assumed you were going to get paid by the end of the month. It's now been 6 weeks. When you didn't see it at the first week, you figured, okay, it's not weekly. You didn't see it 2 weeks, you figured it's not bi-weekly, so it must be monthly. 6 weeks have passed and you're not being paid because there's nothing there. And the employer will say, well, I'll pay you, just work, you will get paid. but there's nothing there. And we say that people cannot work like that. You can't be productive in an environment where you don't know when you're being paid. And then when that paycheck comes, you don't really have a clue how much you're being paid. So we now say you have to write a statement saying who you're working for, and the legislation is very clear. In the schedule, it spells out what has to be in there. Who, where, when, how you're being paid, how much you're being paid, what deductions are coming out, in what amount, and so on. And then it also says you have to get a pay slip. Because again, a lot of people get money, they get a packet which is just an envelope with some money in there. They were expecting $200, they see $103, and they don't know where the other money went. And somebody will say, well, yeah, no, that national insurance had to come out and whatever. And you don't know. Now you have to get a pay slip that says these were the deductions that were made. It means then when you check national insurance, at the end of, you can call national insurance next month and say, well, listen, my employee, I have a pay slip here saying that they took out $83 from me and they paid in that as my contribution. Do you confer? And it is for your protection, because again, too many workers are let go, and then they find when they go to national insurance for unemployment, or when they're sick and they go for their sick leave, national insurance, well, I have no record of you, I know nothing of you, because the money was coming out, never paid. When you have a pay slip that says the money is coming out, we have a place to start, because we have evidence then that this person owes, this employer owes national insurance on your behalf. But if there isn't, they could say, well, they can deny.
Revolutionary as the act may be, the Labour Minister acknowledged that it's not perfect and the need for amendments to be made has already arisen, namely with the rights and responsibilities of employers and employees during a national emergency.
And I'm realizing, well, okay, we are going to have to go back and pretty soon to make the necessary adjustments to the legislation. I've already spoken to Cabinet colleagues on this. We're going to have to make an amendment.
Minister Bayersuku believes that employers should look beyond the bottom line, employees should look beyond the paycheck, and both should consider basic human rights and safety. She noted that both parties must also communicate effectively to ensure everyone is aware of their employment rights and responsibilities in emergency and all other situations.
I don't want to think that we'd have to get to the day where people are making their way to work during when a storm is threatening, and then to find something happens and these people lose life or limb, and then we say, you know what, they should have stayed home, the employer was wrong, he shouldn't have called them out, and so on. Hindsight is always 20/20. I believe that we now see where this is becoming a problem. There is, let me say, ambiguity. All right? And for the avoidance of doubt, the legislation now needs to address specifically this matter. So as I said, I've triggered the process so that we should begin consultations. And if an amendment is necessary to legislation, it may be done. If it's an amendment to legislation that has to be done, we'll do it. If it's a regulation that has to be included, we'll include it. Various things can happen, and it may not be under employment rights. It could be under the Emergency Management Act, anything like that. I don't know yet how it will be done, but I'm ready to start the consultations because this cannot continue like this.
For more information on the Employment Rights Act, contact the Labour Department, Ministry of Labour, Warren St. Michael at 310-1500 or visit www.labour.gov.bb. You may also purchase a copy of the Act at the Government Printing Department, Bay Street, St. Michael.